Mary, Queen of Scots, also known as Mary Stuart or Mary I of Scotland, was Queen of Scotland from the 14th of December 1542 to the 24th of July 1567 and Queen Consort of France from the 10th of July 1559 to the 5th of December 1560. Mary, the only surviving legitimate child of King James V of Scotland, was 6 days old when her father died and she acceded to the throne. She spent most of her childhood in France while Scotland was ruled by regents, and in 1558, she married the Dauphin of France, Francis. He ascended the French throne as King Francis II in 1559, and Mary briefly became Queen Consort of France, until his death in December 1560. Widowed, Mary returned to Scotland, arriving in Leith on 19 August 1561. 4 years later, she married her first cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, but their union was unhappy. In February 1567, his residence was destroyed by an explosion, and Darnley was found murdered in the garden. James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell, was generally believed to have orchestrated Darnley's death, but he was acquitted of the charge in April 1567, and the following month he married Mary. Following an uprising against the couple, Mary was imprisoned in Lochleven Castle. On the 24th of July 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favour of James, her 1-year-old son, by Darnley. After an unsuccessful attempt to regain the throne, she fled southwards seeking the protection of her first cousin once removed, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Mary had previously claimed Elizabeth's throne as her own and was considered the legitimate sovereign of England by many English Catholics, including participants in a rebellion known as the Rising of the North. Perceiving her as a threat, Elizabeth had her confined in various castles and manor houses in the interior of England. After 18.5 years in custody, Mary was found guilty of plotting to assassinate Elizabeth, and was subsequently executed. Childhood and early reign. Mary was born on 7 or 8 December 1542 at Linlithgow, Scotland, to James V, King of Scots, and his French second wife, Mary of Guise. She was said to have been born prematurely and was the only legitimate child of James to survive him. She was the great-niece of King Henry VIII of England, as her paternal grandmother, Margaret Tudor, was Henry VIII's sister. On the 14th of December, 6 days after her birth, she became Queen of Scots when her father died, perhaps from the effects of a nervous collapse following the Battle of Solway Moss, or from drinking contaminated water while on campaign. A popular legend, first recorded by John Knox, states that James, hearing on his deathbed that his wife had given birth to a daughter, ruefully exclaimed, "It can why, alas, and it will gang why, alas." His House of Stuart had gained the throne of Scotland by the marriage of Marjorie Bruce, daughter of Robert the Bruce, to Walter Stuart, 6th High Steward of Scotland. The crown had come to his family through a woman, and would be lost from his family through a woman. This legendary statement came true much later, not through Mary, but through her descendant Queen Anne. Mary was baptized at the nearby Church of St. Michael shortly after she was born. Rumors spread that she was weak and frail, but an English diplomat, Ralph Sadler, saw the infant at Linlithgow Palace in March 1543, unwrapped by her nurse, and wrote, "It is as goodly a child as I have seen of her age, and is like to live." As Mary was an infant when she inherited the throne, Scotland was ruled by regents until she became an adult. From the outset, there were two claims to the regency. One from Catholic Cardinal Beaton, and the other from the Protestant Earl of Arran, who was next in line to the throne. Beaton's claim was based on a version of the late king's will that his opponents dismissed as a forgery. Arran, with the support of his friends and relations, became the regent until 1554, when Mary's mother managed to remove and succeed him. Treaty of Greenwich. King Henry VIII of England took the opportunity of the regency to propose marriage between Mary and his own son, Prince Edward, hoping for a union of Scotland and England. On 1 July 1543, when Mary was 6 months old, the Treaty of Greenwich was signed, which promised that at the age of 10 Mary would marry Edward and move to England, where Henry could oversee her upbringing. The treaty provided that the two countries would remain legally separate and that if the couple should fail to have children, the temporary union would dissolve. However, Cardinal Beaton rose to power again and began to push a pro-Catholic, pro-French agenda, which angered Henry, who wanted to break the Scottish alliance with France. Beaton wanted to move Mary away from the coast to the safety of Stirling Castle. Regent Arran resisted the move, but backed down when Beaton's armed supporters gathered at Linlithgow. The Earl of Lennox escorted Mary and her mother to Stirling on 27 July 1543 with 3,500 armed men. Mary was crowned in the castle chapel on 9 September 1543, with such solemnity as they do use in this country, which is not very costly, according to the report of Ralph Sadler and Henry Ray. Shortly before Mary's coronation, Scottish merchants headed for France were arrested by Henry, and their goods impounded. The arrest caused anger in Scotland, and Arran joined Beaton and became a Catholic. The Treaty of Greenwich was rejected by the Parliament of Scotland in December. The rejection of the marriage treaty and the renewal of the old alliance between France and Scotland prompted Henry's rough wooing, a military campaign designed to impose the marriage of Mary to his son. English forces mounted a series of raids on Scottish and French territory. In May 1544, the English Earl of Hertford raided Edinburgh, and the Scots took Mary to Dunkeld for safety. In May 1546, Beaton was murdered by Protestant lairds, and on 10 September 1547, 9 months after the death of Henry VIII, the Scots suffered a heavy defeat at the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh. Mary's guardians, fearful for her safety, sent her to Inchmahome Priory for no more than 3 weeks, and turned to the French for help. The French king, Henry II, proposed to unite France and Scotland by marrying the young queen to his 3-year-old son, the Dauphin Francis. On the promise of French military help, and a French dukedom for himself, Arran agreed to the marriage. In February 1548, Mary was moved, again for her safety, to Dumbarton Castle. The English left a trail of devastation behind once more and seized the strategic town of Haddington. In June, the much-awaited French help arrived at Leith to besiege and ultimately take Haddington. On 7 July 1548, a Scottish parliament held at a nunnery near the town agreed to a French marriage treaty. Life in France. With her marriage agreement in place, 5-year-old Mary was sent to France to spend the next 13 years at the French court. The French fleet sent by Henri II, commanded by Nicolas de Villegagnon, sailed with Mary from Dumbarton on 7 August 1548 and arrived a week or more later at Rochefort Saint Paul de l'Écoute in Brittany. Mary was accompanied by her own court, including 2 illegitimate half-brothers, and the 4 Marys, 4 girls her own age, all named Mary, who were the daughters of some of the noblest families in Scotland: Beaton, Seaton, Fleming, and Livingston. Janet, Lady Fleming, who was Mary Fleming's mother and James V's half-sister, was appointed governess. Vivacious, beautiful, and clever, Mary had a promising childhood. At the French court, she was a favourite with everyone, except Henry II's wife Catherine de' Medici. Mary learned to play lute and virginals, was competent in prose, poetry, horsemanship, falconry and needlework, and was taught French, Italian, Latin, Spanish, and Greek, in addition to speaking her native Scots. Her future sister-in-law, Elizabeth of Valois, became a close friend of whom Mary retained nostalgic memories in later life. Her maternal grandmother, Antoinette de Bourbon, was another strong influence on her childhood, and acted as one of her principal advisors. Portraits of Mary show that she had a small, oval-shaped head, a long, graceful neck, bright auburn hair, hazel brown eyes, under heavy lowered eyelids and finely arched brows, smooth pale skin, a high forehead, and regular, firm features. She was considered a pretty child and later, as a woman, strikingly attractive. At some point in her infancy or childhood, she caught smallpox, but it did not mark her features. Mary was eloquent and especially tall by 16th-century standards, while Henry II's son and heir, Francis, stuttered and was abnormally short. Henry commented that, from the very first day they met, my son and she got on as well together as if they had known each other for a long time. On the 4th of April 1558, Mary signed a secret agreement bequeathing Scotland and her claim to England to the French crown if she died without issue. 20 days later, she married the Dauphin at Notre Dame de Paris, and Francis became King Consort of Scotland. Claim to the English throne in November 1558, Henry VIII's elder daughter, Queen Mary I of England, was succeeded by her only surviving sibling, Elizabeth I. Under the Third Succession Act, passed in 1543 by the Parliament of England, Elizabeth was recognised as her sister's heir, and Henry VIII's last will and testament had excluded the Stuarts from succeeding to the English throne. Yet, in the eyes of many Catholics, Elizabeth was illegitimate, and Mary Stuart, as the senior descendant of Henry VIII's elder sister, was the rightful Queen of England. Henry II of France proclaimed his eldest son and daughter-in-law King and Queen of England, and in France the royal arms of England were quartered with those of Francis and Mary. Mary's claim to the English throne was a perennial sticking point between her and Elizabeth I. When Henry II died on 10 July 1559 from injuries sustained in a joust, 15-year-old Francis became King of France, with Mary, aged 16, as his queen consort. Two of Mary's uncles, the Duke of Guise and the Cardinal of Lorraine, were now dominant in French politics, enjoying an ascendancy called by some historians la tyrannie gauzienne. Mary and Francis II. Shortly after Francis was crowned King of France in 1559. Royal arms of Mary as Queen of Scots and Dauphine of France. Royal arms of Mary as Queen of Scots and Queen Consort of France. Mary's arms as Queen of Scots and France with the arms of England added, used in France before the Treaty of Edinburgh, 1560. Royal arms of Mary as Queen of Scots and Queen Dowager of France. In Scotland, the power of the Protestant lords of the congregation was rising at the expense of Mary's mother, Mary of Guise, who maintained effective control only through the use of French troops. The Protestant lords invited English troops into Scotland in an attempt to secure Protestantism, and a Huguenot rising in France, called the Tumult of Amboise, in March 1560 made it impossible for the French to send further support. Instead, the Guise brothers sent ambassadors to negotiate a settlement. On the 11th of June 1560, their sister Mary of Guise died, and so the question of future Franco-Scots relations was a pressing one. Under the terms of the Treaty of Edinburgh, signed by Mary's representatives on 6 July 1560, France and England undertook to withdraw troops from Scotland, and France recognised Elizabeth's right to rule England. However, the 17-year-old Mary, still in France and grieving for her mother, refused to ratify the treaty. Returned to Scotland. King Francis II died on 5 December 1560, of a middle ear infection which led to an abscess in his brain. Mary was grief-stricken. Her mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici, became regent for the late king's 10-year-old brother Charles IX, who inherited the French throne. Mary returned to Scotland 9 months after her husband's death, arriving in Leith on 19 August 1561. Having lived in France since the age of 5, Mary had little direct experience of the dangerous and complex political situation in Scotland. As a devout Catholic, she was regarded with suspicion by many of her subjects, as well as by Elizabeth, her father's cousin. The Protestant reformer John Knox preached against Mary, condemning her for hearing Mass, dancing, and dressing too elaborately. She summoned him to her presence to remonstrate with him unsuccessfully, and later charged him with treason, but he was acquitted and released. To the disappointment of the Catholic party, however, Mary tolerated the newly established Protestant ascendancy, and kept her half-brother Lord Moray as her chief advisor. Her Privy Council of 16 men, appointed on 6 September 1561, retained those who already held the offices of state and was dominated by the Protestant leaders from the Reformation crisis of 1559 to 1560. The Earls of Argyll, Glencairn, and Moray. Only 4 of the councillors were Catholic. The Earls of Atholl, Errol, Montrose, and Huntly, who was Lord Chancellor. Modern historian Jenny Wormold found this remarkable, suggesting that Mary's failure to appoint a council sympathetic to Catholic and French interests was an indication of her focus on the goal of the English throne over the internal problems of Scotland. Even the one significant later addition to the council, in December 1563, Lord Ruthven, was another Protestant whom Mary personally disliked. In this, she was acknowledging her lack of effective military power in the face of the Protestant lords, while also following a policy which strengthened her links with England. She joined with Lord Moray in the destruction of Scotland's leading Catholic magnate, Lord Huntly, in 1562 after he led a rebellion in the Highlands against her. Mary sent William Maitland of Leathington as an ambassador to the English court to put the case for Mary as the heir presumptive to the English throne. Elizabeth refused to name a potential heir, fearing that to do so would invite conspiracy to displace her with the nominated successor. However, Elizabeth assured Maitland that she knew no one with a better claim than Mary. In late 1561 and early 1562, arrangements were made for the two queens to meet in England at York or Nottingham in August or September 1562. But Elizabeth sent Sir Henry Sidney to cancel in July because of the civil war in France. Mary turned her attention to finding a new husband from the royalty of Europe. However, when her uncle, the Cardinal of Lorraine, began negotiations with Archduke Charles of Austria without her consent, she angrily objected and the negotiations foundered. Her attempt to negotiate a marriage to Don Carlos, the mentally unstable heir apparent of King Philip II of Spain, was rebuffed by Philip. Elizabeth attempted to neutralize Mary by suggesting that she marry English Protestant Robert Dudley, 1st Earl of Leicester, whom Elizabeth trusted and thought she could control. She sent an ambassador, Thomas Randolph, to tell Mary that if she would marry an English nobleman, Elizabeth would proceed to the inquisition of her right and title to be our next cousin and heir. The proposal came to nothing, not least because the intended bridegroom was unwilling. In contrast, a French poet at Mary's court, Pierre de Boscozel de Chastelet, was apparently besotted by Mary. In early 1563, he was discovered during a security search hidden underneath her bed, apparently planning to surprise her when she was alone and declare his love for her. Mary was horrified and banished him from Scotland. He ignored the edict, and 2 days later he forced his way into her chamber as she was about to disrobe. She reacted with fury and fear, and when Moray rushed into the room, in reaction to her cries for help, she shouted, thrust your dagger into the villain," which Moray refused to do, as Chastelard was already under restraint. Chastelard was tried for treason, and beheaded. Maitland claimed that Chastelard's ardor was feigned, and that he was part of a Huguenot plot to discredit Mary by tarnishing her reputation.